So we have a couple of guests with us here this evening. First of all, I'd like to welcome Raina. Raina is at the back there, so wave hi. And Raina is here visiting the UK from the university in Tokyo, in Japan, and is spending a few weeks with Sussex University, and is doing a documentary on LGBT Christianity. And when Raina goes back to Tokyo, is looking to start an LGBT-focused church, just as we have here. So Raina will be using a camera throughout the service. If you really would like to not appear on camera, please let me know, and we'll make sure that you're not included in it. However, it is a documentary that will be seen in Japan, so I really wouldn't worry too much about it. But if you really don't want to be seen on camera, then please let me know, and we will make sure that doesn't happen. So, Raina, a very warm welcome to here to the village. And And of course, secondly, our second guest is Alex, and Alex is here fresh from Greenbelt, where I know that both James and Alex have been having a great time, and I know that Alex is doing a lot of ecological work through and with the church, which I have read about, but I think I will leave to Alex to talk about. So please welcome our guest speaker this evening, Reverend Alex Mabbs. Thank you, Alex.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to be with you again and sharing worship with you. Yes, back from Greenbelt from last weekend, and it's a very good festival, a lovely, inclusive, friendly, accepting kind of vibe goes on at Greenbelt, which is really great. And if you want to hear a sermon that will make you cry, the sermon from last Sunday's communion service is online on the Greenbelt website, so greenbelt.org, I think. And the sermon was given by a teenage girl, James for confirmation, I can't remember exactly how old, 15, yeah, who had experienced a really difficult birth, and her brain was damaged when she was born, so she communicates. I was right at the back of the field, and someone said, "Hasn't she got a clear voice?" And then she said she's using one of these speech computers like Stephen Hawking has, but it was a much more listenable voice than Stephen Hawking has. But yeah, incredible. And just her talk, she's got cerebral palsy, she's in a wheelchair, and she was on stage giving the sermon to 10,000 people at Greenbelt. It was phenomenal. And so if you want to see a sermon that will make you cry, that's the one. It's just phenomenal about the love of God for everyone, you know, and also touching on forgiveness, and because people made mistakes, she said, but life, you know, and she talked about how she deals with that, and it's great. Anyway, as a bit of by the way, really, yeah, I'm the minister at the Brighthelm Centre down in the middle of town. And also one of the recent things that we've been doing, and I can't remember if I told you about this last time I was here, was we started a Forest Church meeting in Brighton. I didn't tell you. No. We started a Forest Church meeting in Brighton. It's called Open Sky Forest Church. Open Sky because we think we're meeting on this great big open sky, this open love of God. And we meet on the second Sunday of the month, so I'm just in time to tell you about next Sunday, because that will be our monthly gathering at 3 o'clock, and we meet in the Upper Lodges car park on Ditchling Road, Stammer Park, up there at 3 o'clock, and then we walk for about 5 minutes into the woods, the same place. So we've watched this woodland change through the year from winter, and we're just going to start watching, you know, the autumn colours come over the next couple of months. And a large part of our gathering is just time on our own to be with God in nature, and then come together and talk about what it was like, really. So it's very simple, and you'd all be very welcome to come. But if you want to look up anything, it's the website for that is openskybrighton.com. Thank you. But tonight we're talking about Earth. You've got 4 elements, and the 4 elements taken over the 4 Sundays of September. So tonight is Earth, and we're going to be looking at that Psalm 136 to try and help us think about. I'm taking it very broadly, talk about earthing our faith really as much as anything, earthing our lives, and using this psalm to help us do this. And we're going to see if we can stretch our story into a bigger picture. I don't know how far, if you think about your faith journey and your story of your faith, I wonder how far back you'd reckon that went. You know, if you were telling someone the story. And maybe it doesn't go back even as far as 6:25 this evening. Who knows? I don't know most of you and where your story is. Would it go back to a point, you know, back in the dim and distant past when God became real for you? Where would your story go back? And what I want to try and help us do tonight is to enlarge our stories and stretch them out a bit and get a bigger picture so that we can earth them in this big, steadfast love of God that endures forever. And this psalm is the most obvious psalm in the Bible that it's a piece of worship, it's a piece of liturgy. There we are, that's that refrain over and over. Every verse, two halves, one half, something God has done, and the second half, that same refrain. About in the translation we had, whose love endures forever, God's steadfast love endures forever, is in the New Revised Standard Version. Over and over. And it begins, and that's quite that's quite natural, you know, give thanks to the Lord who is good, God's steadfast love endures forever. That's fine. And we come into God alone does great wonders. His steadfast love endures forever, who by understanding made the heavens. God's steadfast love endures forever. We move into acts of what we would call probably acts of creation. And there are echoes in these opening verses of the story of Genesis, the story of God speaking and bringing the planets, the sun, the whole shebang into being. And so if this is a story of faith, it doesn't really almost work as a story of a community's faith, does it? Would you say? Creation happening here. Does that work as a communal story of faith, or a... We'll see. And so there's several verses going through some of the acts of creation, and then immediately in verse 10 goes on to more an act of deliverance, without even a full stop. So it's not even a change of sentence, but you're saying, yeah, who's God's steadfast love endures forever. He made this, he made that, made the moon, the stars. Who struck Egypt through their firstborn? God's steadfast love endures forever. I don't know if that feels like a bit of a moment for you. It's not, yeah. And partly as a moment because this is about the plagues of Egypt, which are uncomfortable reading, I think, and they're uncomfortable if we want to talk in the same verse and the same sentence about God's steadfast love. What about God's steadfast love for the firstborn of the Egyptians? And there are all sorts of issues which I am not going to even begin to address. Ask me back. But we move on to, if you want, without going into the tricky detail, there is a slight jar because we're moving into, from creation to, if you like, salvation for Israel, at least, in their story. You know, they were slaves in Egypt. God brought them out through the Red Sea into the Promised Land. This is the story in a nutshell. And each turn coming through here through the battles against Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan. It's a wonder anyone took him seriously, wasn't it? There we are. He was king, so I suppose they had to. But through these details, that's the essence of it. God bringing God's people out of slavery, delivering them into freedom, and giving them a land to be their heritage, is the word that's used in the New Revised Standard Version there. And the refrain, it seems to me, this repeated refrain, God's steadfast love endures forever, connects those two different acts, broad categories of God's acts, creation and salvation, into one. So the subtitle for tonight, which appeared, I saw the other day, is ongoing creation. And I think that's exactly what this psalm is getting at. That there's no difference between God's acts of creation and making things and bringing things into being, in that nurturing and providing for animals, plants, us. There's no difference. And then acts of deliverance, acts of salvation, God intervening, God helping us, God giving us life. It's all one and the same. This refrain that God's steadfast love endures forever unites them all. And God, this steadfast love of God is woven throughout the fabric of creation, the fabric of the universe, the fabric of space, and the fabric of time, the fabric of salvation history, the fabric of our history. Okay? And those things are the same thing. And in the Old Testament story of Israel, salvation for them was earthed in the land. The land was where it was at. It wasn't just they're going to go to heaven when they die, because they didn't have that kind of way of thinking. Their salvation lay in having this land, this gift of land, that would be their possession, that would be their heritage. And always within, that was going to be a gift from God, God's grace, within this covenant relationship. Because of the love of God. And it was rooted in the love of God. And it's as soon as Israel started treating the gift like something that was theirs by right, or that was a commodity that they could manage and trade and buy and sell, and became, and they could say, I've done this by my own hands. That's when they lost it. That's when the gift was withdrawn. They had to remain within, if they were to hold that land and be there, they had to keep within the kind of the realm, the understanding, consciousness of grace and the land as a gift, and God's gifts as a gift of God's love. It wasn't something they sorted out for themselves, it was given from God. And I think this psalm functions as a way of helping them remember. It's so obviously something they would have said in communal worship, isn't it? And it's a way of keeping that memory alive. And this is really my big point. I think this is important for us to keep our memory alive of God's steadfast love and of grace, and to keep that memory alive within the bigger story of God's story. And not forget that it's by grace that we have anything at all. And so I wonder, what about our liturgy and songs that we use in the church these days? What about the stories we tell? It seems to me it's really important that we don't, and I worry that we're cutting ourselves off from roots of our story. I get some churches and there's no, you won't sing a song that was written before 2000. And I think there's a lot of really good stuff, really good songs that have come out of, come out in the church in the last 50 years. It's really good, and it's great, and it's renewed our worship, it's renewed the life of the church, and give thanks to God for it. But we don't cut ourselves off from our roots and the value of kind of folk music in the life of the church. We have a little monthly service at Brighthelm on a Monday morning, and one of the ladies brings a portable record player and plays some music before and after. And a couple of months ago, she bought a record of hymns. And we were talking afterwards, and she said, that first hymn reminded me of, it was Blessed City, Heavenly Salem. Really quite obscure. And I said, well, that reminds me of this funeral. I was at the person where that hymn was sung. And someone said, and the hymn at the end, we'd had the day thou gavest, Lord. So we never sing that now, because most churches don't have an evening service. You only sing it at funerals. And again, it was that kind of folk memory that the hymn evoked. And it roots you in your story, and you remember people who are part of your community. And I think that's true when we don't just do things that are new, but when we consciously root ourselves in the story of our faith. And that's a story that's a long story. And I think maybe we need to revive the use of psalms in our singing. I don't know how you would sing this, but I think I do know one version of it that I've heard sung a long time ago. Maybe I'm going to sing you a song in a minute, but I maybe should have brought something from the Genevan Psalter of 15. a tune written by Louis Bourgeois or something, real proper reformed stuff. But why not? Maybe the Psalms were the hymn book of the people of the Jewish people and of the church until the kind of the middle of the last millennium and beyond, really quite recently. So it's important to keep this alive. It's why it's important weekly to celebrate the Eucharist, and I really commend you for being on a church that has communion weekly, because that memory, again, on the night when he was betrayed, and it keeps it alive. It keeps the story alive, and as we take the bread and the wine, it makes that story our story. And we're there in the upper room with Jesus. We're receiving the bread from his hands. We're receiving his body on the night before he died. And it makes that alive for us again. It's really important that we rehearse these things. We didn't make this up. We didn't make this thing up in whenever it was this congregation started. We didn't make this thing up in 1662 or in 1517 when Luther nailed his theses to the door of church. Jesus didn't make this up. Paul didn't make this up, okay? We're part of a story, as Paul puts it, we're grafted it as wild shoots, as Gentiles into the cultivated olive tree of Israel. But we're part of a story of faith, of God's acts in creation and salvation that begins in the beginning, at the beginning of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. And it stretches right from that point through to the last Amen at the end of the book of Revelation, which hasn't been spoken yet. And within that great story, that great long story, God is making all things new. God is always at work, with showing steadfast love to all that God has made, making all things new, working with us, working amongst us, working around us. And that's making all things Jesus-shaped, which is why we put Jesus at the centre of our worship. And as a result of that, I think all our relationships, just as we see in this psalm and this repeated refrain, the steadfast love of God endures forever, bringing that love is essentially relational, isn't it? You can't. What's the point saying, I'm full of love and I never see anyone or talk to anyone? It doesn't mean anything, does it? If I say I love you, it doesn't mean anything. Let's actually express it somehow or show it. And I think that's our relationships with the whole of creation, with the earthing of our lives in the world around us, and making those connections, being part of this unfolding story that incorporates the whole of the universe and the whole of time, and earthing our story within that is so important to us, and that we then weave our love into that story as our lives become woven themselves, as God makes us new in the love of Jesus. So I think that's what I've got to say tonight. So I've got a song which... is there time? Mm-hmm. Did you know, by the way, that when Noah went on the ark, okay, this is a story this is one of the stories that didn't make it into the Bible. The editors, for some reason, I don't know why, because it's a great story, they decided this wasn't going to get in. When Noah was getting onto the ark and loading all the animals on, okay, there wasn't a lot of room, okay, so So all that Noah and Mrs. Noah could take with them were 2 ukuleles. Okay, and they could just stash them away. You can stash a ukulele away anywhere. It's so small. You put it in your luggage, you put it in your carry-on, you do whatever. Put it in your shopping bag. So that's all they did. And Noah and Mrs. Noah used to play their ukuleles to the animals at night to, when it was a bit stormy, calm them down, make them feel safe and okay. Okay, and that the kind of consequence of that, you see, is that all musical instruments on the world today are descended from that pair of ukuleles. So this is a song, and the idea of this song, I think, is this idea of God bringing all things together into one. It's that idea of God bringing all things together, making all things new. And the chorus is really easy, which is your part. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to sing the chorus. Bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all into my heart. Okay? Bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all into my heart. Okay? You got that? Yeah. Tune. Bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all into my heart. It's a great song for people who can only sing 2 notes. Bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all into my heart. Yes, right. Bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all into my heart. Can we repeat that? Bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all into my heart. Okay, I'll sing the verses. Bring the little fishes, bring the sharks, bring them from the brightness, bring them from the dark. Bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all into my heart. Bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all into my heart. Bring them from the caverns, bring them from the heights, bring them from the shadows, stand them in the light. Bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all into my heart. Bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all into my heart. Bring them out of murder, bring them out of store, bring them out of hiding, open up the doors. Bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all into my heart. Bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all into my heart. Bring the unforgiven, bring the unredeemed, bring the lost, the nameless, let them all be seen. Bring them out of exile, bring them out of sleep, bring them to the table, sit them at the feast. Bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all into my heart. Bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all into my heart. There's a middle bit here, and it goes like this. Bring them all in, bring them all in, bring them all, bring them